this as, if you view the 2 days of our meeting as sort of most of the meat, this is the dessert of the meeting. I think coming on the heels here of the election, this is going to be an especially fun panel. The 2014 elections are history now. It's just an ancient history, and now we're talking about 2016. I'd like to introduce Peter Cook, who is the Washington correspondent, chief Washington correspondent for Bloomberg TV, where he covers the intersection of business and government. Prior to joining Bloomberg, Peter was a producer for NBC News and MSNBC. Peter will introduce the rest of our panelists, who all are very well known to us and are on television almost daily. So, Peter and gang, thank you.
Grab my microphone here and invite everyone up on stage to grab a seat. It's a fight for the seats, whoever wants to be on the end. But thank you, Steve. Thank you to the committee for having us here today. And I do look at this. I know you all have been talking about some very serious issues, the economy, training of the workforce, cybersecurity, but this is the fun part. We could have this conversation, the five of us down at the Willard bar, probably later today, be about the same as what you're about to get. So this is a good chance for us to compare our own notes as to what just happened in the election and look forward a little bit to the future. I'm going to go down the line here and introduce everyone. I've got Matt Schlapp. He's the chairman of the American Conservative Union. He's also the founder of Cove Strategies and an experienced hand here in Washington. He was a political director for the Bush White House in the first term of President George W. Bush's term. Also a veteran of Capitol Hill. Michelle Cottle. Of course, you've read her stuff all over the place at the National Journal, at the Daily Beast, Newsweek, The Atlantic, senior editor for a long time at the New Republic as well. Bret Baier, see him every night on Fox News with his show each night. He's the chief political anchor for Fox News. I knew him first as a local reporter in Raleigh, North Carolina, where we covered a lot of mayhem together. So
we're not going to talk about that today.
We're not going to talk about that. He has a mean tennis game. I know that as well. And we also have Penny Lee, who is a senior advisor at Venn Strategies here in Washington. She was a communications and policy advisor for Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, soon to be
minority.
Still majority.
I know we got to get used to that. A veteran of Democratic politics, was executive director of the Democratic Governors Association, also a communications advisor for Governor Ed Rendell in Pennsylvania. So we have a lot of wealth and talent here and information to share with you. And I'm going to begin with a big picture question for all of you. Matt, you're next to me, so I'm going to go first because you might enjoy this question more than anyone else up on the stage here. The midterm election, was this full recovery of the Republican brand a turning point for Republicans and their electoral chances going forward, or a pothole for Democrats, or option C is none of the above?
Oh my Lord, I mean, this is nothing other than smashing success for Republicans. If they had underperformed again, everyone would be talking about the fact that this was the Whig Party reincarnate, and they were going to have to come up with a whole new brand name. Their backs were against the wall, and it was a huge election. I don't know how it could have been bigger. I guess Bob Beaupre could have won. I guess Scott Brown, who even ran in a different state, could have won. But this is big in every way imaginable. So anybody, I think, who wants to kind of like undervalue this win, I just don't think is being realistic.
How big a win, Michelle, was this for the Republicans? What does it mean for the future?
Well, I think there's no question it was a huge loss for the Democrats. As far as it was a rejection of the Democrats, but it was not an embrace of the Republicans. I mean, for a real embrace of the Republicans, you have to have more than, say, 37% of the electorate turnout. This was America saying they don't really like anybody. They didn't like the incumbents. Obama was unpopular. So while, yes, I think you are absolutely correct. If Republicans had underperformed, it would have been the storyline going forward for the next 2 years at least. I don't think that this was the huge win for Republicans that you're saying.
I mean, I agree that it's not an embrace of the Republican Party, like, yay, Republicans, but I do think that for all the talk about the Democratic turnout machine that we heard before the election, it did not materialize. And in a number of these states where it was supposed to be close, it wasn't. Now, you're right, the turnout was low comparatively. Midterms are low on turnout. But I don't think you can discount the people who did turn out. The exit polls suggest that 59% of them were there because they really were against the administration. That's not a good thing for the administration or for Democrats on the Hill. I don't think it's an endorsement of the Republican brand. I agree with you, but it's still a win, and it's a W on the board.
And as we would say, sometimes, there's that phrase, winning but winning ugly. So I would kind of characterize this more for the Republicans as it was a win, but as everyone has just alluded to, they didn't come out with this overwhelming sense that we want the Republican Party. It was more that we are tired of where we were at and we want a change. And you can see it in the exit polls. 2/3 of the people coming out said, they weren't all that satisfied. And in fact, they're angry at the GOP as well. 6 out of 10 said they had concerns about the Republican Party. So what you saw was a depressed election. Those that came out were coming out in a greater sense. The Republicans had a better turnout than we did, but it was not this embrace. I mean, if you look at the message was just simply, I'm not Obama. It worked for us in 2006. We weren't Bush. So you're seeing this repetitive pattern come out, and the thing I think is going to be interesting going forward, are we in a different time where a midterm election, the electorate that shows up is different than the presidential, and how does that play long term? Demographically, the midterms do favor Republicans. Demographically, in other ways, it favors the Democrats more. Is that a pattern? Is this now what we're going to be seeing going forward? Or is there going to be any type of disruptive change or a disruptive candidate that can break this cycle that's currently in?
Michelle, I see you leaping to jump in there on that.
Well, one of the points to that is before they started voting, I talked to a whole bunch of Republican women. And one of the things that they were very committed to doing this time was working on that gender gap. I mean, they had every program imaginable. They had super PACs and grassroots efforts and messaging efforts and everything. And they were really committed to kind of shrinking that gap. And one thing we saw this time was a slightly better performance among unmarried women with Republican candidates. I think it was like 7 points. They improved. And a lot of that was a lot of the work that went into getting better candidates who weren't going to go all Todd Aiken at the last minute and blow up the party.
Well, that's
So-
Yeah. I also will say that the tactic of the war on women did not seem to work in a number of states where it had worked before. Colorado, for example, it didn't work for Mark Udall. In fact, he got hammered because of it, because he was running, as the Denver Post said, a single issue campaign, and that made people mad. And with all the things that we were facing, all the talk about and every ad about contraception really didn't fly in that state.
And Cory Gardner was very smart. He came out and rejected his personhood amendment previous remarks, and he embraced the idea of over-the-counter contraception.
Yeah,
and
I-
that kind of diffused
I mean,
the
what's-
issue.
I think
Yeah.
that the reason why the war on women didn't work is because the more it aired out and people saw what it was all about, when people realized, yeah, maybe I don't want to be anti-contraception, but the idea that it's free for everybody at any time, yet you could have a heart pill that keeps you from dying, and that's not free at any time. People start to put this all in perspective, and they say, perhaps the Republicans don't have the right messaging on these sets of issues, but maybe it's not crazy when they say things like it's okay for people to pay a little bit for the pharmaceuticals they need in their life. And as far as the over-counter thing is concerned, this is a trend, which is, why do you have to go to your doctor to get everything you need for your health care? It's okay to go talk to a pharmacist. It's okay to read a label. We can trust each other as Americans to make those decisions.
We
And I think
mentioned
the
Cory
problem-
Gardner. Let me jump in to say real quick. Best campaign of 2014, worst campaign in terms of candidates.
Oh, God.
Penny, I'll let you
Penny
go.
Penny, I think that was
Penny go
you.
first.
Yeah.
I'll go.
I would say, I hats off to Cory Gardner. He ran a tremendous, but I would actually say, and even though it was a losing campaign, hats off to Ed Gillespie.
Yeah.
He ran a terrific race in Virginia, and it's kind of one of those phrases that you always hear, don't wound the king, because usually the aftermath afterwards is you're finished. He ran an elegant campaign, a smart campaign, one that was based on ideas, one in which going forward it actually is going to help him and propel him, I think, to whatever else he might want to run for. Who knows? I hear they only have a one term in governor in Virginia.
Yeah.
So I would say, obviously Gardner won, but Gillespie did himself no harm. And that's very hard to do when you're on a losing campaign, and especially in this day and era where it's so easy to throw up the negative and just splatter mud against everybody.
How about the worst campaign?
I have the worst one. He wasn't on the ballot, but Joe Biden, I mean, boy, did he not come in twice. And just in Kansas, just so you know, when he said, and I'm a Kansan, when he said day of the election or the day before the election that Greg Orman was going to caucus with the Democrats, they put 1 million calls up in Kansas, and I actually think it had an impact. It was just, he weighed in inappropriate ways over and over again.
Best campaign, fair and balanced. Larry Hogan in Maryland, a blue state, and he ran a campaign that was really smart, talking about all the taxes, the rain tax and everything. They had a really good ad campaign. Al Franken in Minnesota ran a campaign that was based on the issues in an atmosphere that was not good for him. He was looking vulnerable at the beginning. Worst campaign, I think, Wendy Davis in Texas, who was flailing and at the end ran a horrible ad against Greg Abbott, who is now governor-elect.
I'd actually agree with that, and it goes back to the other point that we were making about Colorado, in that the war on women, when the war on women gets isolated to one issue, and that is either abortion or choice, it's never winning. I mean, women are offended by that as voters, as citizens, that you're defined by this one issue. We have continued to say we're about economic issues, safety issues, healthcare issues beyond birth control and breast cancer. So when men try to isolate it just to that one issue, the women are going to war against them. So I think in both of those cases, Wendy Davis being identified by a single issue and Mark Udall trying to wage it against a single issue were disastrous results.
Before I switch gears totally to 2016, let's talk about the here and now and what the aftershocks of this election and how they're playing out even right now on Capitol Hill. I've been there the last couple of days. We're seeing it, talk of shutdowns. We're fighting over the Keystone Pipeline right away. And of course, the immigration issue. Michelle, what's your takeaway about what's the immediate fight we're seeing over immigration and the threat of a shutdown over the spending bill and what may be the first signs of a schism in the Republican ranks over the leadership?
There's always this grand talk the day after the election about how we're going to work together and we're going to get stuff done and we're going to find common ground. But one of the things you heard Republicans saying was, if the president goes forward with this immigration executive order, that's it. It's like he's drawn a line in the sand. It's bad faith. And I think that we can pretty much rely on 2 years of more dysfunction. I tend to be pessimistic about these things, and I think that there's going to be gridlock and we're not going to see anything major done. And I did a panel last week with lobbyists from both teams, and they were kind of frank about the whole situation. They're like, it's a full employment program for lobbyists, but nothing's going to get done. Certainly nothing big at all.
Anyone disagree with that?
I think they'll get around some stuff around the edges, off the platter. But I do think that this is not the best way to start for all the common ground talk. This is going to be a political nuclear bomb next week, probably. We think it's going to be next week when this executive order is signed. And there will be Republicans who are calling for an attachment to the continuing resolution. The funding for the government ends December 12th. They're going to call for an attachment to say the president can't do this, and they're going to have a standoff. Now, the challenge will be for Mitch McConnell and John Boehner to herd the cats and to not go over the edge. Because once they do, arguably it falls into the president's
I heard
positive.
Mitch McConnell.
We like the edge. We like to just angle
unfortunately,
on the
the
edge.
country doesn't.
The only thing I'm going to say is that I'm a conservative and a Republican who would like to try to figure out a way to resolve a very broken immigration program in this country. I mean, even just the visa issue where people 40% of this problem are people just overstaying their visa. It's not a border issue. It's not a southern border issue at all in those terms, in those cases. You know, this is going to kill any ability for a decade or so to come up with a real comprehensive legislative solution. I think that is a damn shame, because this is it's a big problem for business trying to figure out our immigration policy to match what our needs are in these markets. And I think I understand politically, if I take my Republican hat off, I understand politically why the president feels like he needs to do this or should do it. But the ramifications are not only going to go along the lines of what Bret said in terms of breaking down the ability to get stuff passed, it's going to destroy our ability on immigration to do something as well.
Penny, let me get your take on this in the sense, if the president didn't do this, how much pain and anguish would there be on the Democratic side? How much pressure is he under to move forward with this?
He's under a tremendous amount of pressure in the sense that many in the caucus and activists feel like he's already broken his promise. He broke it prior to the election for even delaying what he was doing. You know, I guess I'm more in the side of trying to, you know, hoping that we would have some breakthrough from this incredible amount of gridlock and just this tension that is constantly there. I mean, it'd be very easy for Harry Reid to say, come January, let's just run out the clock. Do the same tactics that McConnell did for a while. Run out the clock, throw special orders, you know, make everybody do 30-hour votes and wait in between, because in 2016 the map looks so much better. We have the demographics and we have the electorate that we usually win on, so let's just stall everything and make it go down. But I think that the American people really does want something. So for the president to throw this, even though I know he's under a tremendous amount of pressure, to throw this into the mix at this point, at this time, when there hasn't even been a lame duck session, when you've got transitions all over the place, without even giving it an opportunity when they reconvene in January to possibly come together, I think is disappointing for myself, because it's going to break whatever goodwill is here right now, and I don't know if you can reset it come January.
Do you think Harry Reid's delivering that message personally to the president right now?
I know there's a lot of people in the caucus delivering that message. Whose voice prevails, I can't tell you.
Annie, could you get over and deliver that message? We really appreciate it.
This morning in Burma, the president was very defiant. And,
This is happening before the end of the year. He said it for sure.
And he was, I mean, it was cut and dry, not only on immigration, but Keystone. The pushback on Keystone. Now that will be something. If that bill finally gets through to try to save Mary Landrieu, because it's moving forward in the Senate based on really just that, this runoff in Louisiana. If it gets through, and it looks like it has the votes, and then gets to the president's desk and he vetoes it, that is a big, big deal.
Immediate political question, though, because I love the whole chess match that played out the last couple of days watching the Hill. Does it, no matter what happens here, if the president vetoes it or it doesn't get the 60 votes, did it help Mary Landrieu in Louisiana? Is there any chance that she could prevail because she took the stand?
Listen, she's a good campaigner. I was down there a couple times. People like her. It's just the environment in Louisiana has turned. It's a red state. And it's going to be really tough for her to get over that hurdle.
Well, I think
did it help Bill Cassidy, or is it in play at all?
Let me tell you what's really helped Bill Cassidy, and that is the comments by Mr. Gruber the other day on Obamacare. Obamacare is a disaster for Democrats. Anybody who wants to say that the election was not about Obamacare, it was in large part about Obamacare. And the cynicism, talk about low voter turnout, the cynicism with the statements, and he could try to say now he didn't quite mean it, or I think he said that he spoke off the cuff. It's like, yeah, you did speak off the cuff. You spoke honestly. You let us.
Wasn't in the room.
Okay, whatever. So anyway, I think that has really kind of reignited people's outrage over a law they think that really didn't even have 60 votes to pass.
All right, really quickly, just in terms of we've said nothing's really going to get done. I know folks in the business community, Bloomberg, we talk about this all the time. Even on business tax reform, there's no opportunity to do something.
Well, you did. I think everybody agrees there'll be some rifle shot efforts. You know, they're interested in the tax extenders. Trade is a possibility, but as far as like some grand budget, it's just no, it's not going to.
But I mean, tax extenders and trade, I mean, those are big things for the business community. Those deals will get pushed through. I think the trade deals will go first.
I mean, I agree that those things can do, but the biggest thing out there is entitlement. And, both sides of the aisle like to talk about. I mean, it is the budget driver for all other things, and until you have a willingness to get it out of the next election and a willingness for people to come together over some of the entitlement reforms and not have each other take it to a whole nother level of throwing grandmother in her wheelchair off the cliff, when you want to have a conversation about changing the eligibility age, this economic thing that we're just going to have to bite it around the edges. So, tax reform is a great notion, and I think there's a lot of people that want to talk about it, but, Democrats see it as a revenue raiser, and Republicans see it as a way in which to cut more on trying to get the money out of the government. So, last session,
You wish.
Reid and Boehner were $1 trillion apart. $1 trillion.
With a
on
T.
With a T. On tax reform. How you bridge that gap, it's going to take a lot more conversations.
Mitch McConnell, as deal maker and as majority leader, this is a job he's coveted. He's never coveted becoming president of the United States. Matt, what's he going to be like as the majority leader of the U.S. Senate? And what's the relationship really going to be like between Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell?
Mitch McConnell it doesn't come across as being warm and fuzzy. He is focused on the Senate. He knows more about what's happening at the Senate right now, this week, this year, than anybody alive. It's what he spent. It's what consumes his life. Well, and Harry Reid, I'll speak about McConnell. You work for Harry Reid. You know this as well about your former boss. But he is very focused on the Senate. And if you ask him anything that's going on, he knows where members are. He is a great deal cutter because he knows exactly where members are at any given time. Do not look for Mitch McConnell. He's a little similar to Speaker Boehner in this way. Do not look for Mitch McConnell to go to the conference and tell them what they're going to need to do over and over again. He will at times, when it's dire, Bret, on issues like budget deals and shutting down the government, he will speak up. But by and large, he's going to be a consensus builder as a leader, much like John Boehner has been on the speaker's side. And this is a message to Barack Obama, because the only way I think Barack Obama would ever listen to what I say is if by chance he listened to one of you who was telling him this, or Penny or someone else. But these two Republican leaders, if he can't cut a deal on things like entitlements or the budget with these two Republican leaders, I don't know who he would want to cut a deal with. John Boehner did everything he could to lose the speakership over trying to cut a deal, and Mitch McConnell loves the idea of the big deal. So he could really sit down with these guys and do it. Now, maybe this is not the right moment during a lame duck, but in the last 2 years of his presidency, if he can't get something legislatively done that's big beyond Obamacare, he's looking at a failed presidency. No president wants to look at that.
I mean, Matt talks about a positive about the way they deal with leadership. It's also a negative in the sense that they do have a hard time herding the cats. If you have a Ted Cruz and others, and on the House side there's a whole bunch who are cantankerous, let's say, about different issues. So their leadership styles don't lend themselves to cracking the whip. And that means that you could have some really interesting dust-ups on Capitol Hill. And I think
that's very fair.
Especially because you're going to have 3 senators running for president.
Or more.
At least.
Yeah.
3 on the Republican side running for president.
And, we had the same situation when we took over the majorityship in 2007. We had 4 senators then at that time running for president. And so it's this interesting dynamic. And McConnell and Reid are very similar in that they don't necessarily have an issue or a philosophy in which they are trying to impede upon the caucus. You will hear them often say whatever the caucus will, the will of the caucus. And they run their shops and they run their caucus and conferences very, very similar in that respect, checking in, and they're the best whip counters at the 2 of them are the best whip counters of their own caucuses by far. And it is, it'll be interesting to see in this next year. In 2007 when we took over, we had it was 51-49. Tim Johnson got sick, we went to 50. And Joe Lieberman only caucused against us on Iraq and defense issues. So oftentimes we were at 49, so we were actually in the minority. So we'd have to, wean and try to pull, the Arlen Spectors and the Olympia Snows and the Susan Collins of the world. And so it'll be interesting to see who McConnell now will go to. the Joe Manchins, the Claire McCaskills, the John Testers of the world.
Who all voted against Reed.
Who all voted against Reed. And so you'll be curious to see, because he can't pass legislation with his caucus alone. That's a different dynamic than what you oftentimes have in the House, although Boehner has a little bit more trouble than Pelosi did, about just the strong will. And so there was oftentimes, we would sit every Monday, we would have these meetings, 5 o'clock with McConnell and 5:30 with Pelosi, and we would go over to Pelosi's office after getting kind of where we were on the schedule for McConnell, which was, I'm going to object and we'll do a cloture vote. We go through the schedule, and I remember Reed saying one time to Pelosi, if you would just be a little bit more bipartisan, it would help me, pass what I needed to, because we would always have to take what they sent over and kind of lessen it or weaken it, I guess, if you want to say, or put some compromises on it to get it through the Senate. So it's going to be a challenge for McConnell, but there is no better tactician. There is no one that understands the Senate as well as both he and Reed. He is a master at his craft.
So you mentioned the Republicans in the Senate likely to be running in 2016. Who emerges from the 2014 election in the best shape on the Republican side? We'll start there first.
Well, definitely Governor Walker. I mean, that was almost, it looked like a near-death experience if he had lost that I guess it's his third or second re-election and third election as governor of Wisconsin. It would have been very hard for him.
In 4 years, right?
Yeah, for him to make a claim. And you might say, oh, poor guy, he's run so many times in 4 years, but politically it's a really good thing because his team is battle tested and he has a nationwide donor base, because every conservative across America loves a good union fight, and that's what he was all about in Wisconsin. So I think he puts himself in a I don't know if you're laughing because you're mocking me or you think that's funny, but he put himself in a really good position, I think.
Michelle, what's your take?
Consistently talking with Republican activists and operatives and stuff, they want somebody not on the Hill. So despite all of the senators lining up for this and maybe the occasional congressman, I do think that ultimately it will come down to one of the governors. I don't know if it's going to be Walker or, people are still, there are people out there still dreaming of Kasich and Portmans and Jeb Bushes and stuff like that, but I do kind of think that we will see from the states.
John Kasich, a big win in Ohio.
Yeah,
Double
I thought he
digits in
was
a critical state.
Best positioned after the election.
Yeah.
I mean, that was supposed to be, again, heading into this election, a tough race for him.
It was his
And
test.
then it was his test. But then his opponent ended up in a car in a parking lot at 4:30 with a person who wasn't his wife, and it ended up
not in the driver's seat.
and not yes, and so that changes the campaign quickly. But I think he's well positioned. I think he's positioning himself for a run. He's a governor who obviously has done some things that check the conservative box, but also took Medicaid and is
And live to tell the tale.
and live to tell. Ohio. So I think he's well positioned. I think Chris Christie, believe it or not, has gathered a lot of chits as the head of the RGA around the country. I do think the sit down and shut up did not do him well, and I don't know if Jersey sells across the country. But
Brett, I've never heard you do that on the air. Sit down and shut up.
Yeah, no, I don't recommend.
They'd
saying
probably
that.
whisper in your ear and say, that wasn't good.
Period. I don't recommend. Even to Juan Williams, I wouldn't say.
Patty, how about your take? Let me ask you a little differently for you. You can answer it however you want, but I'll give you this option, and that is, who's the Republican the Democrats fear most right now?
I think that it will be someone that can tap into the populist economic issue in the same way that not is antagonistic on the social side. So whoever can combine that, talking to, the Huckabee used to have it, but they was scared folks more on the socially conservative side that he would take. Someone that can appeal to that middle class worker, that the white male worker that we're losing at a continual rate, the lower economic voter that we're continuing to lose at a rapid rate. So that person that can capture that sense with the personality that you want to have that beer with, that you want to sit down with and can engage with, but that doesn't that doesn't, that is not scared, that doesn't turn you off on some of the more social issues. So, it'll be curious to see. I mean, Rick Perry has a lot of appeal. He has a good story to tell. Whether he'll remember all 3 points of that of that story to tell, we shall see. But there is a great appeal to him, and he obviously has been tested. Whether or not he can recover from the previous election, we shall see. I do think that it'll probably the candidate will come from the governor's ranks more than the Senate or the Congress ranks. It's just, the worst part about being a senator trying to run is you still got to cast votes, and there's going to be a whole lot more. And Mitch McConnell has indicated that he'd like to open up the amendment process, which will be some very, very tough votes coming up. There was a reason why Harry Reid shut down the amendment process, but that's another story. So it'll be curious. Kasich has a good story to tell. He has a good bio, which to say. So there's a lot of different folks, but it's also one of those things that you've got to want it, and I caution against those that are waiting for someone to recruit them in. Even on our own side, Elizabeth Warren and others, waiting for people to recruit them. You have to want this.
It's too hard.
It's too hard. You've got your whole life is there.
One thing about somebody we have not talked about, and she cruised to re-election. Susana Martinez in New Mexico is a Republican governor in a blue state with a 70% approval rating.
That's right.
A wise Latina.
That's right.
And she's doing very well in that state. I would look for her to have a higher profile very soon.
Yeah, I've talked to Republican women in particular and fundraisers who are very high on her, although at this point there seems to be some hesitation on her part to get out there and mix it up. People have a hard time getting her at fundraising events. They have a hard time getting her for interviews. She's very press shy. And so the sense is that 2016 is too early for her, but that she will be a player if she continues on this track.
Michelle, I know you've written about Rick Perry and the new glasses.
Now, I love
Is that
Rick
enough?
Perry. Let me just say.
Are they Google glasses or what are they? They're just kind of...
He spent 20 minutes explaining the glasses to me, which was a sign of he really, really is trying hard to kind of present himself in a different way, and he's pitching the whole elder statesman thing. Because he's a governor, he has a record that he can point to, which is the other problem with being a
He's also
senator.
got that criminal record he has to worry about now.
This is all a terrible misunderstanding. But when you're a senator or a congressman, you're not judged as much on kind of what you've managed to get done in your state, whereas if you're the executive of the state, obviously you have to make the trains run. That said, I do think it's very hard. He tends to go off on these random streams of consciousness discussions, and Texas, not to state the obvious, is not America. So he knows exactly what he can get away with. My family's in Texas, God love it, God
I was
love
going to say, are there any Texans in the room who want to...
But what you can get away with in Texas, you cannot get away with the National Press Corps. So, I traveled with him some, and I love him, and I think that his approach to this as kind of exactly what you said, economic, but not scary on social issues. He's abandoned the social issues in his stump presentations for the most part, but I do not know that they will give him a second chance nationally after you have had a brain freeze on TV like that.
Yeah. Two names we haven't really mentioned here yet. Jeb Bush. Matt, does he get in? Can he deliver the message that Penny talked about? It's not exactly
my wife is Hispanic, Penny knows her, and she always reminds me that it's a whole new ball game with someone like Jeb Bush with the Hispanic vote. I think Republicans, really did great in this last election. There's real hope there. Does he get in or not? Okay, so your brother is the former president, and he tells media when asked it's 50-50, which tells me that his own brother doesn't know what he's going to do. And I'm not so sure Jeb Bush knows what he's going to do. I think Jeb Bush would be a great candidate, but I agree with what Penny said. Don't do it only because you feel like you have to do it. You do it because you think you want to do it, and you're called to do it, and it's the right thing for you in your life to do it, and you're going to pine every moment of every day to think of everything you can do to win. Anything short of that, and we've seen candidates do that, they will fail. The only final thing I'll say is, remember, this is a third Obama term. This will be the third term in a row for Democrats. Ronald Reagan did that with George H.W. Bush. The last time before that, if you kind of remove FDR, was the 20s. Yeah.
World War II.
Right. So, well, you know, FDR. So, you know, if you look at this, as Americans, we don't really tend to like this idea that the same party wins the presidency 3 terms in a row. That's a hard thing for the Dems to do.
I think Bush is in.
You think he's in?
I do.
Really?
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of whispers that the machine is turned on.
Even
The
with
machine is turned on. I agree with that, and I think
Now,
he's-
whether he's, you know,
Yeah.
fully in, the machine is there, and it's
And
been given the green light.
And Brett, you agree that he could raise more money than any other Republican candidate, short of maybe Chris Christie?
No, more than Chris Christie.
More
no,
than
I
Chris
think
Christie.
you could raise the money.
Yeah, he can raise the money. And I think Daddy Bush is.
Which is
is,
the first
fully engaged.
Republican primary is the money primary, and
Yeah.
he will lock up 85% of the folks that people would talk.
Now,
about.
he's going to have a tough time getting through some of those early races. Common Core
Common Core.
is going to be a big issue.
And immigration.
Immigration. And those things, I mean, he's going to have to take his party to a different place. But I think
Tough to do in
he's going to
places
have
like-
to go to a different place.
I don't think he's going to go to a different place. I think that's why he's running.
No.
One other name I want to mention before we're going to open it up for questions from all of you in the audience as well. Rand Paul, where does he fit into this mix? And what sort of a different message is he bringing to this conversation? Michelle, you spent much time watching him, and do you think he's in as well? There's a question mark as well.
I think he's in, barring some, outside factor. I mean, he's certainly interesting, and if you go to CPAC or any of these conservative
Please go to CPAC.
conferences, he really fires them up. I mean, he is the darling. He's the belle of the ball. Now, that said, his foreign policy is still a hard sell for a lot of the base. Even if you don't want to call him an isolationist, he still is not as hawkish as a lot of the base still wants, especially in scary times. So I think he has a huge set of challenges as well, particularly in that area. But he will certainly make the race livelier.
And he's reaching out to different communities, the African American community, other communities that are traditionally not Republican based.
Go
Let
ahead.
me just give a thumbnail on the race from my perspective. A lot of candidates, more than 12. It's good for the Republicans because if Jeb Bush doesn't get in, let's say, even if he does with the issues, this is not typical for Republicans. We don't have a next person waiting to take the nominee. It's going to be big. It's going to be rough. I don't think it's going to be locked up early. I think it's going to be good.
really painful, though, man, couldn't it?
It
could be blood on the floor.
Could be fewer debates.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, yeah.
You know, I think there
Much to
were 20.
Fox's
There were
dismay.
20 last time. I moderated 6 of them. Of the 20, I think 6 were really good. But
I agree.
I think there are going to be 8 this time. So they're trying to reduce the blood on the floor.
Rick Perry, as you might imagine, is very excited.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because there's going to be a teleprompter. No, I agree with it. Kind of that it's going to be messy, and that can be bad. I mean, we watched some of those debates, Brett, and it was, sometimes
It was a great theater.
We didn't know if we were putting our best foot forward. I have to say that. But let's say this: if we lock up too soon on somebody who's really not quite ready, that's not good either. Some of these people are a little green on the national stage. I like the idea that the primary process actually goes on for a little bit. Candidates always get better as they go along, and I want to make sure that we nominate the very best person because I really do think we have a great chance to win.
I mean, and the thing about, just to echo on Matt's point on that, is this is a long campaign. And even in 2008, Barack Obama had a hard time sustaining the movement. It is a long journey that you have to go on. So for someone like Rand Paul, does he wear well? Will be one of the questions and one of the tests that he will have to go through. You have seen him kind of change on certain things and modify where he's at in certain parts, especially on the foreign policy, and he's quick to the cameras and quick to make his point on certain things. Will that last? How long does that wear? Will be one of those tests, and so it'll be curious to see what the strategy of various peoples are. In the governorships, will they be coming and doing more rose garden and speaking, letting their policies and stay as not as a candidate for as long as possible, because once you're in a candidate mode, you're viewed in a completely different context, and it affects the positions in which you're taking and the policies in which you're advocating. And every time you step to the mic, you now have the moniker of presidential candidate behind you, which is just a different lens in which to view. So it's going to be an interesting. I think we went through the same thing in 2008 where we had the cast of thousands all running, and we went through multiple debates, and it came down to 2, and we had the long extended primary run, which we did, which was healthy for our party, and it was good, and it allowed us to keep kind of the momentum going and keeping the narrative alive of where we wanted to be. I agree, locking it up too early has its perils, but you have to make sure that the bloodbath coming out of a long primary is one that is healthy for the party.
Speaking of locking it up too early, Hillary Clinton, does she face a real challenge at the primary level? And who is it?
Yes, I think she will face a primary. Who it will be,
Beyond Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, Bernie Sanders is the man.
I can't wait to watch Bernie Sanders on the stump.
Oh, he is fantastic. I remember when he came over to the Senate, one of the first meetings with Nancy Pelosi was to say, how do you like your socialists now? But
See, we all thought he'd just fit right in.
yeah, we have a big tent. So I think he will be challenged. You're going to have Martin O'Malley get into it. You're going to have possibly another governor also lend the race. You also might have someone, a retired Brian Schweitzer or somebody else such as that feel like they have a specific niche or they have a unique viewpoint in which can challenge Hillary if she's going to get in. We still not know.
She's going to get in.
Still don't know. But yeah. You talk about the machine that's ready for her. That is a machine that is ready to just push go. It's there. So I think she will, and it will be good for her.
Imagine if she doesn't get in. What if?
The Democrats will have a collective aneurysm. They really just.
It will be Katie bar the door. Katie bar the door.
You will have a cast of thousands on both sides.
Well, that could be the best thing for the Democrats if you think about it. I mean, I know.
Matt's stirring the pot here.
Well, Hillary Clinton is formidable. I respect her. I don't want to disrespect. She's certainly doing great in the polls and everything else, but I don't know. There's also some real downsides. And once again, at a time when people are looking for new names and new folks outside of Washington, she's the opposite.
She's had a tough run. Businesses don't create jobs was not a great message with Martha Coakley, who got beat in Massachusetts. She didn't have a great track record endorsing candidates, and Rand Paul will point that out again and again and again. But listen, she's the huge gorilla in the room, and it's I think that Democrats, she probably would be better served to have a primary challenge, just to be a better candidate.
Yes.
All right, I want to open it up to questions from the audience. I know you must have, now I've got a bright light in my eye, so please help me point out people, but I see this woman here at this table here. If you care to grab a microphone, if you could introduce yourself first, that'd be great. Microphone there, and fire away.
Yeah, Hilda Ochoa, Strategic Investment Group. I want to take you down the Pollyanna road just to explore what would happen to politics. And the Pollyanna road goes something like this. There is a nuclear deal struck between Iran and the United States. Iran starts exporting oil. Oil drops to $55 a barrel. That brings Putin to his knees. He needs oil at much higher prices to meet his military spending. He then gives in to European pressures. The world economy starts growing at least 1% higher rate per year, and all of that's going to happen next year. I personally give it a 60% probability. That's sort of even for me. So what would happen to Washington politics if that is the scenario we are living through next year, which is a very glossy scenario, except for the Fed having to tighten when that does happen?
Anyone want to tackle that prospect? I think that, well, I'll let you all go first, and I'll weigh in on them.
I would say from the beginning, it depends on who takes credit for it, who can claim that as the win. But I think overall, especially going into 16, the mood of the country dictates so much of how people feel and the amount that they turn out. So if you're in a vibrant mood, if the country feels like it's on the right track right now, only 34% of Americans feel America is going on the right track. So if there is some shift in that, there is a positiveness for politics writ large. And that only helps with the engagement. That only helps spur those politicians on on Capitol Hill to look for more solutions and to look for more ways in which they all can be positive in the things, having that economic pressure off of them, newfound money, new ways in which to engage, the pressures off on the foreign policy, all of those things only bode well, and how they handle that is the question.
I mean, in your scenario, I think all parties wouldn't be happy. I think Israel would be probably unhappy with that deal because of the concern that Iran would still be spinning centrifuges somewhere that we didn't know, and that would probably factor into our politics in some way, shape, or form. If the economy was cooking, as you suggest, we would be potentially dealing with an inflation situation in which, if interest rates go up 1 point, we pay more on the national debt, interest on the national debt, than we pay for the Pentagon every year. So that would be an urgent situation where we'd have to tackle the big issue of entitlements and long-term funding. So I think that would take more precedent in your scenario.
I was on the 2000 presidential campaign, and the right track, wrong track was great for the Democrats, right? It was kind of the opposite of today, which is a large majority of Americans were saying, hey, Bill Clinton's doing a pretty good job. He passed these not big items in the last couple of years, kind of smaller issues, but we like his leadership. Things are going well. We had to try to convince them that actually things weren't maybe as good as they should be. And plus there was that bias to the fact that they didn't want to give the Democrats a third term. So I think if Obama can actually get those right track, wrong track numbers going and get some positive legislative things, that's his only real hope for kind of turning this around. The only final thing I'll say with $50 barrel oil, I love that, but as you know, a lot of energy entrepreneurs in this country won't, because at that price, a lot of the recovery that we're getting now won't be economic. So there'll be upsides and downsides to the economy.
Michelle, anything you want to add to that?
That's a rosy scenario, and I do agree that kind of the uplift in the country would be great, but you're still going to be in the middle of a presidential election, and you still got a highly polarized Congress, and I don't think that much is going to get done before 2016.
We're always one election away from getting the big things done.
Just right.
I don't think anything's going to get done after 2016.
One more. We're going to get over that hump.
There's nothing.
But if the president wants to get a few things done, he's the big guy in the room. He can actually do it. He's got to decide.
Well, a deal with Iran might be one of those first things. November 24th, an important date to watch. Other questions here around the room? No questions? I don't believe. I'll keep going then, a few more of my own. I want to continue on the, did we see a question? I'm sorry, right there. I've got a really bright light, so it's hard for me to see. I apologize.
Hi, Paul Stern, CED trustee. What do you think are the biggest vulnerabilities for Hillary running for president?
Anyone want to weigh in? I'll say a couple things. First of all, myself, I'll just weigh in as someone who's been covering this as well. The last name is a plus and a minus. We just heard, just as the Bush name, there's this sense out there from some Americans, it's time to move on. We need a new generation of leaders. I think that's both a blessing and a curse for her. I think we've seen already, we've covered it at Bloomberg, her ties to Wall Street, for example, plus and a minus. Helps in the fundraising, but it doesn't necessarily sell that populist, Main Street, Middle America message that Penny mentioned may need to be the message coming from both Republican and Democratic candidates in the next election. I think those are maybe two of the things that stand out, but she's got a lot of things going for her. The experience is a selling point, certainly. The ability to raise money, and again, her name is a plus. And right now, there is nobody standing in her way on the Democratic side, and that's a big plus for her right now.
Although, as a candidate, she has a tendency she's very disciplined and she's very smart, and I think a lot of the lessons they learned last time around we'll see put into practice. They ran a terrible campaign in some ways last time around. But one of the things that we'll need to see is she doesn't turn and adapt very well when something comes at her that is unexpected, or at least traditionally she has not. And so one of the ways that a primary would be good for her is she would have to kind of field some unexpected balls, and she'd have to kind of get back into the campaign saddle. And I think that would really, she would benefit from that tremendously.
Yeah, I mean, I think her biggest vulnerability is that she's not as good a candidate as she is a figure. And she's a powerful figure in the party, but she's not that great on the stump, or hasn't been as of late. The book rollout was kind of brutal at the beginning, to be honest. But there's so much steam that is pushing her along that I think she can get over a lot of that.
And just to echo, I'll echo and agree with what everybody has said before. I think to go even, maybe a micro level even more, is she's going to have challenges within her own sphere. Is that she has loyalists with her, she has loyalists with the president, former president, and she has a lot of different folks that are, kind of in her ear saying, you should need to say it this way, you need to say it that way. And she's going to have to be just incredibly disciplined and have her own theory for the case of how she is going to win, and stay with it in a highly disciplined way, instead of, Bill's person says one thing, another person from her one side. She's got so many concentric circles that have helped her and helped them as a couple, win so many different times, and each has her own point of view, that you can be swayed and pulled off a message so fast and so easy. So to have it in a way, pivot when necessary. Obviously, they started off in 2008 as this, invincible kind of thing, realizing they needed to pivot and make her more humane. You saw her at the end when she gave her speech about the 1,000 cracked, cracks in the ceiling, and that was, people said, why wasn't that the person we got to see the whole time? That was who we should have been seeing, and had we seen that, that's why she would have gotten elected. So, you're going to see her meander, and so I think her biggest, vulnerability right now is to internalize what her theory of the case is and stay with it in a way that she can campaign with authenticity and do it in a way that is relatable and one in which she can own, because she does struggle. She's not as natural as the president is.
She also has to separate herself from Barack Obama, and that's hard to do because she was in his first term, so she's in a tough spot there.
Although she has always been seen as more hawkish than he was, and I think
she's going to have to separate herself on a lot more than just that, though.
Some of that won't be as
Hey, Bret, Bill Clinton, plus or minus for the Hillary campaign?
Well, as a campaigner, huge plus.
Yeah.
As getting around to the country, as we saw in the midterms, he could go places that President Obama could not go. He is by far, I've seen a lot of politicians. I think he's the best at talking to people and making you feel like, you're the person he's talking to in that room. I think he's a great fundraiser and probably would be an asset on that front. What happens with the papers coming out of the library? Are those stories all ginned up again? The thing that is a positive actually for Hillary Clinton is that some Republicans have Hillary derangement syndrome, and they go over the top. And so once they do that, then she bounces back and says, see, look at these crazy Republicans. Don't you want me, middle of the road, steady, sane? And so I think he's a positive, net positive.
I think I saw another question there, right there, the gentleman in the middle.
Yeah, how you doing? Troy Gaskey, one of the new trustees here. So we talked about Jeb Bush briefly, and it's nice to hear you mention Kasich. I've been surprised that his name hasn't come up more, because he's the most logical candidate by far, right? Ohio's kind of electorally important. He's great on TV, very articulate on policy. He's implemented some tough reforms, not to the same extent as Walker. But other than Bush, isn't he by far and away the most
Are you
logical
from
candidate?
Ohio?
No, not at all. No.
Okay, so here's the reason why his name doesn't come up more. Because he's actually a really bright guy. He's very energetic, very forceful. But talk about sharp elbows, he's got them. And so sometimes the people that know him the best, I think I saw Bob Walker in here at one point, sometimes the people that know him the best see this side to him. He's not a natural, smooth kind of politician. He's a little more rough and tumble. Second of all, yes, he's done a great job in Ohio and he won, but Bret characterized it, he annihilated his opponent who never kind of got to the game because his opponent self-destructed. So yeah, it's a big win, but it was kind of like a bye. And then finally, he's had a record that I think a lot of people in the middle would say, hey, that's a great record, but he's got some issues on the right in terms of some of the steps that he's made as well. So, I don't think it's quite as compelling as some might portray.
Over here.
Hi, Joe Minrick, I'm on the CED staff. What do you think of what used to be the conventional wisdom that Democrats have a demographic advantage on the presidential level, and has this most recent campaign changed that in any significant degree?
Certainly called into question. Anyone want to weigh in?
I mean, if you just look at the electoral map as it is, I think even coming out of this election, if you look at kind of where the trends are, Democrats still start out at I think almost 234 electoral votes. And if you see some of the things, like if you take Georgia and you look at Georgia, Michelle Nunn, although she lost, was at 47, which should have been a good year for a Republican. Purdue only got 53. That is a changing demographic that is occurring in Georgia. Arizona, although there was on the midterms, there is a changing demographic occurring. Nevada and other places. So you're starting to see some changing that I think is changing more for the Democrats for a presidential run. So if you start at 234, you don't have that much more to go to get to the magical 270. Whereas the Republicans, if you see kind of where the map is and this changing demographics in Georgia, they have a much bigger hurdle to get to the 270, and the trends are trending away from them. They're consolidating. They're getting deeper into the South and deeper into some other into their other areas, but it's not necessarily an expansion of the map. But that is not to say that it is a guarantee for Democrats. We still have to go out and campaign. There still has to be a message that inspires, and there still needs to be a reason for people to come. It's not just a blanket, you're in this demographic and therefore you vote Democrat.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Penny said. I do think there is a firming up in some states, especially in the South, on the Republican front. Arkansas, there is no federal office held by a Democrat currently, despite all of the campaigning that the Clintons did this time to try to get Mark Pryor across the finish line, the number of congressional candidates. Now it's all Republicans across the board in Arkansas. Louisiana is likely going to be the same way because it's turning redder. So there's that consolidation. I will say that Republicans are better poised with Florida and Ohio, big states with Republican governors now, so they have these machines in those places. But the demographics are shifting, and someplace like North Carolina is a different place than it was 5-6 years ago. Georgia, you mentioned. Even Texas, as crazy as it sounds, is shifting a bit. I do think that it's a little bit, when we talk about the Hispanic population, while it is going up, it's not monolithic. It doesn't vote one way. And if you look at the Pew Research Center poll last week, the top issues for Hispanic registered voters, 1 was education, 2 was jobs in the economy, 3 was healthcare, 4 was immigration. That kind of gives you a sense.
That's a little bit like women. Women, when you ask them their top issues, don't pop up with abortion or contraception necessarily.
Sure.
But it's a signal. And if you're going to have a candidate out there who goes berserk and wants to self-deport everyone, that's going to be a problem, even if that's not your top issue.
Yeah.
So this means the Republicans certainly can do that. George Bush did very well. But what you need to avoid is having that be a really hot button topic come 2016, so that people are having to get out there and make statements, like Ted Cruz, that are going to send a signal that even if this isn't your top issue, you should probably be scared.
Look, the fact is the demographic, the map, the electoral map skews to the Democrats' favor now. I think there's no question about it. When these big states, California, New York, Massachusetts, we were worried that Florida and Ohio were moving there quickly too. When they all start amassing against you, it becomes almost impossible to win the presidency. Second of all, the white population is obviously dropping, and the Romney strategy of optimizing the white vote, I think, was lunacy. And I think the fact that, you know, the lifeline for Republicans is reaching out to these communities. Now, what's interesting is that, yes, Hispanics care about immigration. I'm married to an Hispanic. I spend Thanksgiving and Christmas oftentimes down in Miami, and it's really interesting, is all I'll say. I'll share more stories with you later. But the fact is that to reach out to these voters, yes, immigration is important, but you know, remember, one of the highest African American Republican achievements in terms of their vote percentage was when the gay marriage ballot was on the ballot in Ohio. For Hispanic voters, if you look at issues and you look at how their church attendance and what they think about issues like life, they're very aligned with the Republican Party. So it's interesting. People think that the Republican Party has to become more moderate on issues in order to appeal to blacks and Hispanics. When you actually look at the numbers, they actually have to connect to them on some of these cultural issues, and they've done it with success, and we have success in this last cycle too.
All right, that's the last word because we exceeded our time. We could continue this at the Willard Bar if you'd like, but I think we all have some stuff we have to do today. Thanks for having us, and